He never floated through a tunnel or saw a blinding light. The instant Don Пайпър died, he went straight to heaven's gate. And 90 minutes later, he came back.
Don Пайпър was killed instantly when a tractor-trailer hit his Ford Escort head-on, crushing the small car. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Paramedics covered his mangled body with the tarp. Then Dick Honorecker, a minister, stopped and asked the paramedics if he could pray for Don.
I walked over by the door. Great physical damage on the outside. And I laid my hands on him and began to pray for him.
As he prayed over the body, a sound came from beneath the tarp. Don Пайпър was alive.
Please welcome back to the 700 Club the man who spent 90 minutes in heaven, Don Пайпър. Thanks so much for being with us.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much.
I was fascinated by your book. I read it in one sitting. And before we get into the story of what you saw and experienced in heaven, tell us how you came back to life.
Well, a man was praying for me. You saw Dick Honorecker. He felt led of the Lord to get in the car. It was an awful accident and very, very heavy damage in the car. And certainly on me, I was killed instantly. And he crawled under a tarp. They'd covered the body up with a tarp, placed his hands on me and began to pray for me because he just felt God told him to do so. So he was obedient. He didn't worry about his theology, whether that made sense or not.
He was a good Baptist preacher.
He just did it and prayed for me. Now, many other people had been notified I'd been in an accident as well, but they didn't tell them I died. So they were praying for me only with the knowledge of the accident itself. So that went on for quite some time, and 90 minutes after the accident happened, he was singing the hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," holding on to me under the tarp in the dark, because we were under the tarp together. And suddenly I started singing the hymn with him. And he got out of the car really fast because he was very frightened and excited.
Because a dead man was singing with him
The dead
again.
man was singing. That's exactly right.
Now, what did you experience during those 90 minutes?
The reality and the majesty and the bliss of heaven itself. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord for those who know Him and love Him. And that's exactly what I experienced. I was surrounded by people I had known and loved in life who had preceded me. Every single one of them had had a spiritual impact on my life. So here I was now surrounded by these people. Some relatives, some friends, some teachers, but every one of them had influenced me for Christ by telling me about Jesus, taking me to church, living a Christ-like life in front of me. And they were all around me and they looked really, really good. If you want to look good, heaven is the place you want to be. And they were all perfect in every way, blemishless, as was I. I mean, I was very mangled in the automobile accident back on earth, but I didn't have a scratch on me in heaven. I believe the only one in heaven with scars is Jesus, to remind the rest of us of how we got there. So I saw these people, and there were magnificent gates. There were indeed golden streets. There was incredible music, not only in quality, but quantity. I've never heard such music before or since. Heaven is the most real thing I've ever experienced in my existence.
And we read in the Word about gates of pearl and streets of gold, and that we will spend our time worshiping the Lord. You know, if you talk to a teenager, I spend a lot of time serving and ministering with teenagers, and they think, well, we're going to sit around and sing all the time?
Oh, no.
And they probably have no idea of what you experienced from the music.
Heaven is an incredibly active place. I mean, imagine one of the things that you do is greet the people who come after you. What a wonderful thing that is. And since there's no passage of time, people are always coming and showing up, and you get to praise the Lord with the incredible songs. There's the fellowship of believers. We will dine at the Lord's table. It could hardly be more active. It is an exciting place. And the best thing about it is God is there. That's where we want to be. He created us for fellowship, and in heaven we get to fellowship with Him forever. Forever.
I'm sure you've had your share of skeptics who say you just had some experience, and because you'd read the Bible, that's what you experienced. How do you respond to them?
Well, there were several things that made it particularly real for me. For one thing, I experienced things there I didn't expect to experience. I even saw people there I didn't expect to see there.
Really?
And so in a very real sense, there were a lot of things that happened while I was there that exceeded anything I had ever read or even thought about before it happened. So it became an even more real experience than what I would have imagined if I were imagining it. It is the most real thing I've ever had happen to me. But it's a faith process. You're not going to convince somebody about the reality of heaven unless you convince them about the reality of Christ. And of course we know he lived. And he's the only way to go there. So because I knew him, when the truck hit me, I went to heaven because I knew the way. Jesus is the way. That's what he said. When they asked him, how do we get to heaven? He said, I am the way. So I went because I knew the way. You can go too.
Well,
everybody can.
Your book has been tremendously popular, over 1 million copies sold, New York Times bestseller.
Right.
Why do you think people resonate with your story? Why are they so fascinated with heaven?
They're looking for hope. People want hope in this life and in the life to come. And both of my books have been about not only heaven and the reality of heaven, that you could go there, but having a meaningful life until you go there. You know, and so people are looking for that eternal hope, but they're also looking for hope now. Many people have gone through extraordinarily difficult times, a tragedy, a loss, a disaster, and they're wondering, how do I get through this life? And I want to give them hope about that too. I had to figure that out because I had 34 operations, was in a hospital bed for 13 months, and I needed some hope about the rest of my life. And so in a very real sense, that's what I'm trying to do. Immediate hope, what I call a new normal, and eternal hope, which is heaven that Jesus is preparing for us right now. So they're looking for hope, and I'm trying to do that in everything I do and say.
Well, your recovery afterwards was certainly not a cakewalk. You had tremendous recovery and pain to deal with. But how did that experience of heaven change your life once you were back among the living?
Well, I often say that if you know where you're going, it ought to make the journey easier. And if we're Christians, we know where we're going. We know how it turns out. I was watching a football game the other day that had already been played. It was a replay of a football game. That sounds pretty desperate, doesn't it? But I wanted to see how they got to the end. You know, we know what the end of our life is if we're Christians. We know where we're going. Shouldn't that make the journey easier, even if we go through difficult and, in some cases, tragic experiences? And so that's what I wanted to do. I had to find that out, and it was in deciding to help other people get through their losses and tragedies that I was able to get through mine, because it made some sense out of my experience. And yes, there were many operations and long therapy, much rehabilitation, but through that process I've been able to walk again when they said I never would. And I function. I'm not, you know, I have a lot of limitations, but I can get from point A to point B. God has helped me do that, and I want to help other people do the same thing. Well,
I was wondering how much pain you still deal with, and I appreciated your honesty about the depression you dealt with when you came back.
I did have
having
depression.
Experienced heaven.
I surely did.
Your first book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, really is the story of what happened to you, what you experienced, your recovery. This book, Heaven is Real, how is it different, and what message is in it?
Well, Heaven is Real is that book. It's the subtitle is Lessons on Earthly Joy, and it is the book about helping people cross over the bridge. I was on a bridge when the wreck happened. Crossing over the bridge, I went on one end in my red car, and the other end I was taken off in the back of an ambulance. So my life was never the same. We're all crossing bridges, and this new book is to try to help people get through the tragedies and losses of life.
Well, this book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, was fascinating to read, and it really made me look at even this life in a different way, knowing the reality of what we have. Exactly. And Heaven is Real. These books are available across the nation, so please get a hold of them. Gordon, over to you.